Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be rebuilding some forks off my KTM 150SX. It's a 2014. But before we get into the video, I wanted to show you guys something cool. We finally got our own merchandise. As you can see, I'm wearing it. It's pretty sweet. And then we got the blue Mint logo with a little motocross helmet. These also have no tags, so no more scratchy tags for you guys. If you guys wanted to pick this up, it'll be the first link down in the description. And while you're at it, you might as well add a free moto sticker pack. Alright, let's get into the video. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to unscrew this compression adjuster all the way out, and we're going to count the amount of clicks that it takes so we can reset back to the stock position, as well as the rebound side of the fork. So we're going to take this little plug out here. Plug just comes out. And then we're going to count the amount of clicks that it takes to relieve the rebound. Turn this to the left until it bottoms out. Now as you see, we clamped this bottom fork lug in the vise with a pair of soft grips. We're going to grab our 19mm socket and break this loose here, just like that. Once you have backed this out all the way, you'll hear it start to click, just like that. Once it clicks, you know you're good. And then we're going to come around and we're going to pry this dust seal loose. Grab a small screwdriver, stuff it in between the upper fork body, and break it all around just like that. Bring it down. And then you're going to take that same screwdriver, and there's a retention ring in here, and we're just going to pry it out of the groove. You'll see what I'm talking about when you guys do it. It's a little challenging, just got to be careful. Kind of work it around. Should pop out just like that. And now for this step, we took the fork out of the vise because the first time I did it, I had the fork in the vise. Didn't really work out. Slipped, bashed my finger up pretty good. So this is the main tool for the job. It's just a flat piece of aluminum that has this groove cut in. And you'll see when we do it, you slide it in there, and then you can loosen this lug off the shaft. But for this application, we use a wrench. It's a 13mm. Should just do the job, so you don't have to go and spend money on parts that you don't really need. So we're going to compress this fork down pretty far. We're going to take our 13, stuff it up in there, just like that. Now for this step, you're going to want to make sure that this wrench is in there good. Don't want it slipping out on you. You're going to need to put a little bit of pressure on this thing. Make sure it's locked down in the vise good. And grab a 17mm, place it here. And we're going to grab our 19mm again. And we're going to loosen this off of the shaft. Just be careful with this step. I decided instead of freaking out at this thing, we're just going to grab some heat, loosen the Loctite on this thing. Kind of scares me. Still making sure that all the wrenches are in the correct position. Don't want this thing to come flying out of there. You got oil everywhere. Just like that. Compress the fork. Wrench should slide out. Slowly lift this up. We're good to go. Now we're going to grab a drain pan, empty this oil. Looks pretty clean actually. Granted, there's probably only 20 hours on this fork, but I like to maintain my bikes too. So we're just going to set this here and let it drain for about 20 minutes. So we put the fork in a vise, making sure to place the fork on the bottom triple clamp position here. And then we have just a pair of pliers that we have some soft jaws on these things. We're just going to place it. You got to be careful you're doing this. You don't want to mar it up too much, you know. It should just break loose. So this is your inner cartridge here. Loosen this up all the way. It's a big old thing. We're gonna lay some towels on the bench here, and then we're gonna lay this thing out. So we're gonna take this, gonna lay it on the table. Some rags to soak up that oil. So our fork has been draining for about 20 to 25 minutes. Dripping out. Oh, yeah, there is. Looks like I pissed myself a little bit, but now we're gonna slide hammer this thing apart. We already have a retaining ring and dust seal out of the way, so we can just kind of. We're going to set the outer fork tube aside, and then we're going to pull our spring out of the inner fork tube. It'll come with a little white retainer. Set that down, and the spring will come out. Looks like with a lot of extra oil. We can just set this down here. So we have here is our upper fork bushing. You can see there's a gap there. You're just going to kind of separate it with your fingernails. Spread it apart just like that. lift it up and over. Set that. Now you have your other bushing, your washer, your old crappy oil seal that leaks oil everywhere, your retaining clip, and your dust seal. So now we're going to inspect this lower fork tube. Run your hand and your fingernails along here and see if you feel any burrs. If you feel any burrs, you might want to take care of that because that may cause your oil seal to leak oil. This one seems good. You can always get some polishing wheels or something and repolish this thing up, refinish it. But this one, for the most part, seems good. So we're going to install our new parts now. Okay, with everything cleaned up, we're going to install our seal bullet on top of the fork tube. Just slides on like that. We're going to grease it up a little bit so everything slides smooth. Kind of just goes on smoother that way. First thing we're going to install is our dust cap. I like to put grease on the inside of this thing too. We're going to install it with spring side down. Next we have our retaining clip. Now for our new oil ring, we're going to install a Pro X oil ring. So on this oil ring, it's important to get the orientation correct. On this side, there's no open spaces, it's closed. And on this side, there's an open space here. And then you could see a spring in there. The oil creates a seal by putting pressure inside this groove. And then it seals the inner fork tube, and that's why it doesn't leak oil. So we're going to lube this thing up and put it on the inner fork tube. So I like to put a little bit of grease on the inside of this oil seal here. Remembering that this retentioner spring is going to face up towards the oil. We're just going to slide it on, nice and easy. Make sure it's even. Then we have our washer. And here we have our bushings, our old bushings. I ended up ordering some bushings, but they came in and they were not the correct ones. So we're going to install the old ones. What you want to look for is making sure that the surface here on the outside is not all marred up. There's no heat markings or anything like that. And on this one, you want to look on the inside. Same deal goes for that one. Making sure there's no scars, scrapes, scratches, heating issues, anything like that. And they should be good to go. So we're going to remove our seal bullet here. Just kind of wiggle it off of there. I'm going to grab our bushing, slide it on, slide this one on. We're going to separate the two ends here, kind of slip it over. You want to make sure that this fully seats and clips into place. You'll hear it, just like that. Spin it a couple times to make sure it's good. Yep, it's good. So for the next part, this is where we're going to use the electrical tape. This is a little trick that I saw online somewhere. I don't know where I saw it, but what we're going to do first is we're going to clean the surface of the lower fork tube. So we're going to get a little contact cleaner here. We're just going to kind of clean in this area here. So now we're going to grab our electrical tape and we're going to evenly place tape around the tube. And we're going to make sure that it's completely parallel. And we're just going to go around a bunch of times, making sure to keep it nice and even all the way around here. And this is what we're going to use to drive our seal into the upper fork tube there. You don't want the seal to be able to slide past this tape, so we're going to tape it up pretty good. Nothing too crazy. Once you have a good amount of tape on there, you can cut the tape there, rip it down. Now we're going to load this thing into the bench vise, making sure it's nice and tight. Now we're going to grab our upper fork tube, making sure that every groove inside here is nice and clean. There's no dirt, grime. You can spray a little contact cleaner in there as well. Now basically what we're going to do is we're going to slide this over. Everything should seat just fine. We're going to pound this seal into the upper fork tube. You'll notice a change in pitch when you bottom out the oil seal. Another trick to knowing when you're done is when you lift this up, you can peek in there and see if the retainer clip groove is revealed. And if it is, you're good to go. And if it isn't, you got to keep going. Easy way to take this tape all off, you just kind of let it spin out there. And then we're going to clean any leftover residue that the tape left. Now we're going to snap this retainer ring in. Doesn't really matter where you start, just get it started. Then poke something in there to push it into that groove. You should hear a click. Quick, easy way to install this dust seal cover. We're just going to slide it all the way down to the bottom of the lug, just like that. And then we're going to take our upper fork tube and just kind of ram it down. and then it should just come up with the upper fork tube and we're good to go. Now we're going to set this guy to the side and get to the inner cartridge. Now we're going to move on to the inner fork tube here. This is what that guy looks like. We're going to need a Phillips screwdriver, a brake bleeder that I ordered off of Amazon. I'll link that in the description below. I have a Motion Pro tool to remove the cap, and a 2.5 millimeter Allen key. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to remove our compression adjuster. Unscrew that guy. Then we're going to take our screwdriver and remove the inner screw closest to the center of the cap. Should probably grab the right size screwdriver. I confirm that it's a size 1. This will have an O-ring, be careful of that. Now we're going to take this syringe tool that I ordered from Amazon. We're going to take the needle here, stuff it on the cap. By the way, this is the only Corona injection I'm getting. Remove this cap here, set it aside, and we're going to stuff it right in the center. It'll puncture the bladder. We're going to let the air out. We're going to remove that. Now grabbing our Motion Pro tool. It's kind of like a castle shape. Just going to slide it on, find the correct fitment. There you go. Grab our handy dandy pliers. Stuff it. Remove the tool, unscrew the bladder the rest of the way by hand, and it'll come out just like that. Let it drip for a second. Place it on some rags. We're going to take this thing out of the vise, empty it into the drain pan. Angry at me. You can let it sit and drain for a sec. So here we have our Maxima 5-weight fork fluid. We're going to fill this cartridge up to about halfway on this section here. So right about there. We're just going to fill it up. Okay. A little bit more than halfway, but that's okay. Now that we have the oil in the chamber, we're going to bleed the air out of the system by slowly lifting the rod up and slowly bringing it back down. You're going to see some air bubbles come out of the oil. Just nice and slow, nice and easy. Do this about 3 to 4 times. I'm going to do it about 5 to 6 just because I want to make sure that this thing is absolutely dialed. Probably just let it fall like that too. So we're going to let this thing sit for about 10 to 20 minutes, making sure there's no air bubbles in this thing. Give those air bubbles down here time to come to the top, come to the surface here. And we'll check back in 10 to 20 minutes. Okay, this thing is sat for about 10 to 20 minutes and the oil level has decreased. It's gone right about here. So we're just going to top it off to that halfway point again. Like that. Now we're going to grab our bladder here. It's completely deflated. And we're going to stuff this thing in there. Oil's going to come out of the top. And we're going to screw it on. Here comes the oil. We're just going to grab our castle tool here. And we're just going to screw it on. Whoa. And we're going to want to torque this cap to a spec of 20 to 22 foot-pounds. There we go. We're all set to go on this end. Now we're going to mount the cartridge in a place where this is the highest point. It's pretty much on a perfectly straight plane. And we're going to undo this 2.5 millimeter hex head. And oil will come out. This is just to make sure that the right amount of oil volume is in the cartridge. And there's going to be an O-ring, so you got to be careful. So here we just have a gauge. I dialed the PSI down on the air compressor, so it's hardly putting out any air. I can do a lot of air, like that, or I can do just a little bit of air, just like that. So the spec for this bladder at this step is about 7 PSI, but we're going to fill it up to about 9 because when you remove this tool, it loses about 1 to 2 PSI. So when you pull it out, it'll be right at 7 PSI. Now for this part, it's a little tricky. We're going to take our needle here and we're going to poke it in the bladder again top of the bladder right in the center there. Poke it in just like that, and then we're going to lock our air up to it. A lot of people use a nitrogen tank. Depending on your riding style, if you're riding hard, your shocks get real hot, then you can use nitrogen. It's more of a stable gas. It's easier on your components, stuff like that. So you can lock your air onto your needle there. You want to place a rag over that bleeder hole, because when you fill it with air, the oil will come out of that bleeder hole and it'll shoot everywhere if you're not careful. So put a rag there just to be safe. So right there we're at about 8, and right there's about 9. Now as soon as I release this, you hear some air. That was at 1 to 2 psi. We should be set right at 7. Now we're going to replace this 2.5 millimeter screw here. Don't over tighten this, be careful, just give it a good snug. So now this point here should be the highest point. Next step is to bleed out the air, and what we're going to do is we're going to push this rod up and down slowly. And as you push the rod up and down, you should see air and oil come out right there. Not a lot of air, that's a good sign. As you push this rod in, it should fully extend by itself. That way you know you properly bleeded the system here. So now we're going to go back to our gauge and our needle here. We're going to fill it up to 17. But remember, when we pull this thing out, it loses 1 to 2 psi. So we're going to fill it to 19. So we should be good. Now we can reinstall our screw. Then we can reinstall our compression adjuster. I'm going to throw a little bit of Loctite on here. And we got a trick new orange one. You can hold this and snug it down as well. Then we're going to install a push bleeder. You just push the button and it bleeds the fork instead of having to unscrew. Tighten it. Good to go. And we're going to do one last check to make sure all the air is out of this chamber here. We're going to compress this rod all the way till it bottoms out. We're going to let it go, and it should extend all the way. Yep, there it goes. We're good on this one here. Nice and smooth. There's no points where it sticks. Perfect. So before we slide the rod into the tubes, we're going to want to make sure that this is pushed all the way up onto the threads. That way we can get this cap fully seated. And now to assemble this beast, we're going to put our spring. Put our spring in. That. We're going to put any preload spacers that we have inside. You're going to want to make sure that preload adjuster is flat on top of the spring. And then we're going to slide our cartridge down the center. Like that. Slide our upper fork tube up to the threads here. Just hand tighten this cap because we're going to need to get this cap off again to put some more oil in there. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to compress this shock, throw our 13 mil wrench in there, put our dampener rod in there, put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, thread our cap on all the way by hand. As you can tell, the jam nut has not reached the cap yet, so we're going to tighten these until they butt up against each other. Just going to thread this on. Now we're going to grab our torque wrench and torque this to a spec of 22 foot-pounds. We're going to compress our shock, slide our wrench out. Okay, once you've tightened this, we're going to torque it down to 22 foot-pounds. And now you can reinstall your rubber dust seal. So our next step is to fill the rest of this fork up with some fork fluid. And the manufacturer spec calls for 365 milliliters, right about there. Fork up with the remaining fluid. We're going to unscrew our adder cap, slide the fork down a little bit. Something that helps is kind of tilting the fork to one side and pouring the shock fluid onto here. And that way you can kind of get it where you want it. See how it just flows around that thing? We're not leaking anywhere, that's a plus. Now we're going to slide our upper fork tube up and thread this cap the rest of the way on. Now we're just going to give this thing a good snug and it should be good to go. There we go. Alright guys, thanks for watching the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay tuned for more and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.